Sangye Khandro I'm just going to tell a few stories, and mostly because Isla had requested that those of us who were close to Rinpoche could say some inspiring things. Well, I guess I was close to Rinpoche for a very long time, actually my whole adult life, and so I have many inspiring things to say. Many, many. But if we start at the beginning, it came to my mind, I'd like to say that I'd like to tell you what it was like when I first met Rinpoche, what he was like. This is not about me, this is about Rinpoche, obviously. Rinpoche, I think many of you know, was asked by the Dalai Lama to come with the first group of Canadian Tibetan refugees, or Tibetan refugees who were accepted by the Canadian government. So they became Canadian citizens automatically. And then later Rinpoche came to America at the invitation of Dorje Rinpoche and also Darshan Tunku Rinpoche. And this was back in the early 1970s. And Rinpoche was actually vacationing, you might say, relaxing in Hawaii. Rinpoche had been invited to Hawaii by two students, Phil and Anne Groenquist, and they had property on Maui, where Rinpoche later built a beautiful little stupa. It was the first stupa to be built in the Hawaiian Islands, and one of the first stupas to be built in the United States. So it was there that I first met Rinpoche, just by chance, because I was involved with another Rinpoche. I had been studying in Dharamsala, India, and my partner and I had brought over Nechung Rinpoche. Many of you may have heard of the Nechung Oracle. Well, this is Nechung Rinpoche. Is different from the oracle, but the head of the Nechung Gompa, and so forth. And due to political reasons, he had been living in Ladakh Budvihara in New Delhi, not at his monastery in Dharamsala. And he had told my partner and I, whose name was Jesse, that he wanted to come to America. And so Jesse, who was very clever and had many connections in Hawaii, was able to invite and bring Nechung Rinpoche to the United States, to Hawaii. But he actually arrived sooner than we did. So he came and was waiting for us, and the Groenquists invited him to come to Maui because Gyatrul Rinpoche was over there, and there'd be somebody he could hang out with and talk to. None of them spoke any English. And so we arrived expecting to see Nechung Rinpoche, and we saw Nechung Rinpoche and Gyatrul Rinpoche. But I still remember when I walked in the room how surprised I was, because I'd never seen a Lama that looked like Rinpoche. He had his trademark sleeveless red vest that he always wore in those days. Maybe some of you have seen the pictures of Rinpoche in his sleeveless red silk brocade vest. Solid color red, but fire engine red. And he was so playful and had such a different kind of light energy about him. Now, mind you, Nichiren Rinpoche was extremely formal. And he's from Lhasa, so he was an aristocrat. And a very beautiful looking man. He even had a protrusion at his crown, like the Ushnish bump of the Buddha. Long earlobes, very, very handsome, attractive, and very refined and poised. And the other Rinpoche, as we knew at the time, was really just the opposite. And so then the fun began, which was a little bit, stressful too, because I did not speak Tibetan at the time. I was a Buddhist, I was learning Dharma, but I hadn't really started studying Tibetan formally, just street talk. And the translator we had arranged for was in Thailand. He was a Tibetan, but he was temporarily being a monk in Thailand. The Dalai Lama had sent him there, so we were unable to get him in a timely manner. So the long story short is that in order for us to function with Nichiren Rinpoche and do anything, we needed Lama Gyatrul, as he was called at the time, to help us, because he spoke a few words of English and was very clever and very engaging. And so we started, and we had renovated a Japanese Buddhist temple on the Big Island to invite Nichiren Rinpoche to. But we all went there, including Gyaltsen Rinpoche, but Nichiren Rinpoche said it was haunted and he wanted to leave. It had been a burial ground, that's true, and it had also been isolated for 50 years. And so, anyway, he was scared there. Gyaltsen Rinpoche was not, but we all had to shift to Honolulu, rent a place, and start a center. And guess who the translator was? Lama Gyatrul. Some kind of translator. It was very, very entertaining and fun. And as the months went on, I was trying to pitch in too. Nichiren Rinpoche would deliver a Dharma talk very formally in his beautiful Lhasa dialect. And then there's another couple who were part of our center who were learning Tibetan, and they would help, and another friend. And then Gyaltsen Rinpoche would help, and we would all go on like that. And I began to notice the qualities. I mean, it was pretty obvious to see the qualities of this person, which were just emanating the truth of the Dharma. He was so humble and so unassuming. There was no ego at all. And in those days, Rinpoche didn't have any attendants. Rinpoche went around by himself. And I never really thought, you're not supposed to ask Tibetans how old they are, right? At least some of them, at least not, a tulku. It's kind of rude, but it never dawned on me that Rinpoche was probably in his early 50s, because he seemed like I was about, in my early 20s or mid-20s. Rinpoche seemed like he was in his 30s at the most. And it didn't matter where Rinpoche sat. All these things that seemed to be important in the hierarchy of Tibetan Buddhism, this never mattered to Rinpoche. He could sit anywhere. It didn't matter what Rinpoche was called. It didn't matter who you are, what stature you were from, or what status, and there were so many things he was willing to, humble himself to be in any position just to be helpful. And he also made it a lot of fun. And so I noticed that we had brought over Nature Rinpoche, who was never really a Lama I had even studied with, but our hope was to start this center. And he seemed like a good choice. But my allegiance and my devotion started growing towards Lama Gyatrul because I liked his style. And he was teaching me what seemed to be the important points of Buddha Dharma. And it went on from there. And eventually, Rinpoche fell ill, and there's other parts to the story. But I guess I just wanted to, share for this time, just give you an idea of just how humble our Rinpoche really was and continued to be. And I think Rinpoche wanted all of us students to be that way too. And I always remember, in all the many years we spent together as Rinpoche got started in the West teaching, Rinpoche would always, give me teachings and others about how we should conduct ourselves around our lamas. And one of them was that you don't portray yourself as a teacher when you're with your teacher or when your teacher is still alive. And that always really stuck with me. And so in subsequent years, people used to say, well, Sangye, why aren't you teaching? Why aren't you, this and that? That's the reason why. I got that. I understood that. And it wasn't until Rinpoche became elderly and was really in a state of retirement that because I had to do something, and Rinpoche was always saying, you should teach, that I began trying to help and do something. And it was just to serve his needs, honestly and truly. And so I think those and other lessons are really good for Westerners to, understand and embrace, because humility and compassion and these basic principles, renunciation, loving kindness, they are the basis of the path of Buddha Dharma and the message that our masters seek to bring to us. And if we don't get those down and we sit and practice these esoteric techniques that we don't really fully understand that well anyway, then it's hard for us to make progress. We have to admit that. And so really these main points we must embrace, particularly that of humility. It doesn't really matter who you think you are or what you think your stature is. You just need to respect the other person more than you love yourself or want to, put yourself up like that. That was probably the biggest thing that I learned from Rinpoche over the years, all the way to the end. And now, in Rinpoche's passing, because he doesn't have to be here and admit it in a corporeal form, we see, in case we didn't see before, we see now what a great master was amidst us for so many years. And in this experience over this last month, I've been running into a lot of older students, some of whom are from other sanghas, and some of whom were connected to Rinpoche, but others who, of course, were around Rinpoche, and even Tibetans have come up to me and said a similar kind of thing. I didn't really appreciate who he really was. They say like that. And the other day, one person said to me, I was always afraid of him because he would just say things about anybody without any filters. And I was afraid that he might insult me in front of somebody else. Like having that kind of fear. So I didn't want to go around him. Wow, did I miss out? Well, Rinpoche Rinpoche began that even back in those teaching sessions with Nechung Rinpoche. But back then, like naming people, that was one of his main ways to poke. Back then he didn't have the English to name them, so they always got Tibetan names. Like the one girl in the class who always had a question would raise her hand and go Triwa, because that means question in Tibetan, Triwa, and so her name became Triwa. That's Georgiana Cook in Hawaii, who is a very excellent translator for the Kargi Lamas on the Maui Center her whole life. And then there was another student, Neil, that Rinpoche named Shamo Kon. Wears the hat, or wear your hat, put your hat on, because he always was hat off and on before and after teachings. And so Rinpoche didn't know his name, so we just called him Shamo Kon. And then there was the, of the many, the Nyomas. Nyoma means crazy lady. And just, different, like Na Chempo, Goop Chenmo, big butt, big nose. And he would give people these names in Tibetan. Slowly, as Rinpoche began learning English, the names became English names too, right? Noodle, octopus, turtle Dundee, daikon, whatever the names were, piggy. So we all know our names, or other names we don't dare to say at the moment. But, Rinpoche's way of teaching could be very cutting and very direct, and it made people afraid of him because it wasn't always easy to accept that, and it wasn't something that people were necessarily used to coming from a Tibetan master such as Rinpoche. But I have to tell you, Rinpoche didn't even stop doing that among his peers. And so who were his peers? The likes of Gyapche Pena Rinpoche, Yangtang Tuku Rinpoche, Dodip Chen Rinpoche, just list them off. Even Khenpo Jigpun Rinpoche and his niece and his sister. Rinpoche would also poke them continuously. I used to be shocked. I just didn't, I would just bury my head. I couldn't believe he was doing it. And I was embarrassed, but he just was having fun. And the only one, I do have to say, the only one I never saw him poke was Gyapche Dujum Rinpoche, and also Songyam Kusho. I think he was afraid of Songyam Kusho. And for some reason, Gyapche Dujum Rinpoche, and of course His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and maybe I should say Khenpo Jime Punso Rinpoche, maybe not too much, but very playful and sometimes crossing the line. But for them, this was very fun and very refreshing, because no one would do that, right? No one would dare to do that, and they're also human, and they want to have fun and laugh and, just be normal sometimes, and not always be adored and put up on high pedestals and so on and so forth. I mean, they're actually basically bodhisattva, humble beings in this world with us. So, these are all the lessons that we can bring to our path of practice, and as difficult as it may be. And over these few days, during this 10-day period of practice, which is now down to 8, going very quickly, each one of us who have been asked to say something will rotate and spend some time and also answering some of your questions that you've submitted. I wanted to mention in conclusion here this afternoon that let's all be sure to remember the 4 remedial powers in the Vajrasattva practice. I notice there's a lot of questions having to do about details concerning the practice, but to me the most important point of Vajrasattva practice is the 4 powers. And I assume all of us who are here know what they are, but let me just reiterate. So there's the power of the support, which is the visualization. And in this case, with Cherten Kunzang Nima's practice, which is very advanced level practice, actually on the level of Maha'ati, then that's visualizing yourself as Vajrasattva in union with consort. So in a sense, you are the support. And that is very pithy because you are acknowledging that you are, in essence, Vajrasattva already from the beginning, right? That is who we are. We're already perfectly complete as wisdom Buddhas, male, female. So the support. And then the power of remorse. Recalling what our bad habits are. Habits, bakchak. We used to think about all the fancy ways we could translate that word, habitual tendencies, and so on and so forth. But it really is just habit. What you are obsessed with in terms of having repeated the same thing over and over and over again, and the different emotions that it's associated with from countless lifetimes until now, both on a subtle level and on a coarse, crude level. Even dreams are the product of habits. Nothing more, nothing less, just the habits of the ordinary dualistic mind. Dreams are not special in regard to that. That's all they are. So we have regret for these habits. And then there is the power of the purification, which is reciting the mantra with mindfulness, not just saying the words because we've memorized it and then our mind is wandering all over the place, but reciting the mantra and following whatever is designated in the liturgy for the purification of the stream of nectar to take place. But that basically we're feeling that our temporary dualistic mind, which is shrouding our innate Buddha essence, is being purified. And the key to that is that it's temporary. That's why it can be purified. It's not permanent. Buddha essence is permanent. Buddha essence is forever and can never be erased. Buddha essence is static and it is independent. Whereas the temporary, dualistic, ordinary mind is interdependent. It is impermanent. It is unstable. It's the source of all of our suffering. So this is what's being purified. That's how we have to think. And then the final power is that we commit ourselves to no longer repeat these habits again. Now that's a big commitment, and that's where things fall apart. Because we do repeat. We are stuck with our dualistic mind, but at least we have to be more mindful and really take that commitment more seriously, which is why these 4 powers are so important. And they are really what makes the Vajrasattva practice work, you might say, in terms of a skillful method that's applied together in union with wisdom awareness, prajna and upaya united. And so don't forget these 4 powers when we engage in the practice. Thank you.